It's good to see both Ian Hamilton and Ian Duguid here. As some of you recall, last year we almost had Ian Murray visit us. That didn't quite work out, so we figured we're going to get an Ian here. So we have two, just in case. I have a number of questions. I don't think we'll have time to get to every one of them, so don't feel offended if your question is not brought up. A couple of them are addressed very specifically, and some others are really open to both of you. And I thought this was a very interesting and good question.
Do you want to read into that?
Yes, a very good question, which is this: how can I, as a child, make it easier and help my parents to love one another?
Do everything they tell you. That's a very, I don't think I've ever been asked that question. The best thing you can do, whoever you are, for your parents, is to pray for them. Pray that your father will love your mother as Christ loved the church, and pray for your mother that she will love your father and respect him, honor him, and obey him. Family life, let me go back one little stage. I think the church, the evangelical church, too easily imbibes the expectations of the world. We expect our children to be rebellious at some point in their life, by and large. Well, I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I don't mean that. That is not the expectation I don't think we are to have. Family life is to be sweet, and one of the ways that children can best serve the good of their parents is to give their obedience sweetly and immediately. Your parents don't always get it right. I've had at times to go to my boys in particular, but also to my girls, and say, I'm sorry, I got that wrong. I act too quickly at times. That's why the Lord gave me the wife he did, amongst other things. But give your parents sweet and immediate compliance. And ask the Lord to give you a sweet and compliant heart. And pray that your mum and dad will be everything that the Lord has called them to be. Great question.
Ian Duguid, you've mentioned the word assimilation in your presentations. What are the marks of assimilation that a Christian must be aware of?
Well, of course, the mark of assimilation to the culture is that there are no marks, right? That's what it means to assimilate, is that you look just like everybody else. My friend, the Old Testament scholar Dan Block, talks about a conversation he was having once with his family around the dinner table, at which, over certain rules that they had, at which at one point his teenage son burst out, "Why do I have to live in such a prehistoric family?" Yes, not quite the... To which Dan commented, while the wording of the response may have left something to be desired, my heart responded that I'm doing something right here, right? That my son is recognizing there's a difference between our family and the families around us. And so the mark of assimilation is that you're just like everybody else, and that nobody's ever surprised by you. Christians should be surprising people Because people have a stereotype of what Christians are, right? They think they know who Christians are, but they should be blown away when they meet real Christians. They say, wow, you're not like I thought you were. And I think family is one place where people should be able to see that. It was intriguing in our church plant in California. After a while, we had a number of people visit us and stick with us, and we asked them, well, what did you like about our church? One of the things they said is, well, we have teenage children, and we've noticed that the teenage children in this church seem to get along well. They seem to love their families, and that was really attractive to us. That was humbling, of course. It wasn't the preaching, it wasn't the worship, it wasn't anything like that. But I thought, how wonderful that the teenage, and this was not just our kids, teenage kids in the church were the kind of kids that other families looked at and said, we'd like our kids to mix with these kind of kids, to be these kind of kids. That's a testimony to what God was up to there. In the workplace, if you're not different from people around you, you're assimilated. Now, obviously, that will look different in different contexts. In some places, it'll be very intense. In other places, much less so. And we're not to go seeking trouble and constantly pointing out, oh, I'm different here. But it should be inescapable. And so the fact that we're facing, the different direction in the stream should make us stand out.
This one's really for both of you. Although the topic wasn't brought up, and yet it's applicable, I think, to what you're talking about. The question is, how crucial is one's eschatology in determining how one lives in exile? That's for both of you.
I never think about eschatology.
Please. I wasn't going to let you get away with it.
I don't like the word. I think eschatology should be buried within Christology, and that our thinking should be about Jesus Christ and his glory, and not about some dislocated theological loci that determines whether you're pre-post. I'm not pre-millennial, I'm not post-millennial, I'm not amillennial. I'm not a futurist, a preterist, a historicist, or an idealist. I'm a Jesus Christist. Now, that sounds a little arrogant. It's a bit like, 1 Corinthians 1, we're of Paul, we're of Christ. What I simply mean by that is that I was converted in a dispensational Baptist church, and I just assumed that was the gospel, and I had a chart up on my wall. And yeah, you identify with that. And I think the more I read the Bible, I thought, well, the Bible's really about Jesus. It's really about Jesus. The book of Revelation is actually the easiest book in the Bible to understand. I don't mean all the details are easy to understand, but the message, it's a pastoral letter. People forget that. It's a pastoral letter. And it's about Jesus Christ. It's the revelation of Jesus Christ. God doesn't give us his word to confuse us. And God is saying, Jesus reigns, he rules, he's coming again, and you belong to him. The victory is yours. So let me not try and be cute. My eschatology is God created all things for his glory, and therefore everything we do should be for his glory.
Let me echo the thought that the book of Revelation is a very straightforward book. My son Jamie used to love the book of, still does love the book of Revelation. When he was about 13, we attended a church where instead of having a Halloween party, they had a Reformation Day party where you were invited to dress up as your favorite Bible character or church history character. And so there's a bunch of John Calvins and Mary and Joseph and David. And there's my son Jamie as the angel of the sixth bowl of judgment. with his lightning and hail and all the rest of it. But the point is, he understood the book, because the book is, Jesus wins. And what teenage boy doesn't like a book in which there are battles and then the great king wins in the end? It's all of the stories. I do think we can talk helpful about eschatology as a way of describing the way in which sometimes as Christians we get things wrong. In terms of over-realized eschatology and under-realized eschatology. Over-realized eschatology are the people who, as they read the Bible, seem to think that this world will be more heavenly than the Bible really gives us warrant to believe. And so they have super high expectations of how like the New Jerusalem we can make this Jerusalem. And so they tend to be very invested in changing society around us, and I think that can be distracting, right? Because picking up on Ian's point, we can lose sight of Jesus and what Jesus will do when he comes back that he will not do before then. God has promised to complete the good work in us, right? And sometimes people read that and get real excited, right? I can be free from all known sin, right? No, God has promised to complete the good work in us on the day of Christ Jesus. That's when we're, So it's over-realized eschatology pushes us towards perfectionism, both individually and in terms of accomplishing a Christian society. Under-realized eschatology, of course, leads us to this ghetto, right? Jesus is coming, so let's go sit together with other Christians and wait, because he's coming anytime, soon, now. And so we disengage from society. And so I think, if you want to talk about eschatology shaping the way we live, I think the Jeremiah 29 passage we've referred to a number of times really captures our outlook. That this world is not our home. There's a new Jerusalem that is not here, that is not going to come until Jesus comes back. But in the meantime, we have a task, which is to live for the sake, the shalom of the place where we live. Which is not just about having better craft beer and better society. It's about sharing the gospel. But it also includes loving our neighbors, doing all the things we just heard about in this last talk, which have an impact improving the world around us. So Christians have always been involved in that. So I think that balance flows out of our expectation of what God is up to now, but also what God will not do until the return of Christ.
You won't be surprised by this question, and it's probably on the minds of many who are sitting here. It's this: with the presidential elections at hand and both candidates likely not fearing God, should we as Christians vote for the lesser of two evils or abstain from voting altogether? And a kind of a follow-up, they write, what biblical text should we consider when making this decision for ourselves? You would just say you don't think about presidential elections.
I am not a U.S. citizen. I have a green card, so I don't have to make this decision. Which, by the way, gives the lie to the whole revolution thing, right? This whole thing about no taxation without representation. You guys are perfectly happy to tax me and not let me vote as a green. So don't give me that. I think this is a very challenging situation. And I think a number of Christians are going to come to a number of different conclusions here, because there's no one verse that says, vote for this person, or in this circumstance, choose this rather than that. I think something that is really important is the note that was just struck by Ian, which is that whoever is elected, on the scale of 0 to Nero, so we should rightly and appropriately honor those who, and remember that it is God who puts them in place. God put Nero in place. And God has the right to raise up a ruler in this country who trashes everything that we stand for. Now, as individual Christians, I think it is important for us to consider the issues, and perhaps we should also be asking ourselves, why are our brothers and sisters in Christ coming to different conclusions? Not just leap to some, the assumption, well, people are voting for that person because they haven't thought about this. But it's a real challenge when you have choices where it doesn't seem like either person, either candidate has the character that we would long for in a president, and not just the character in the sense that in their private life there are some things that are not right, but there's almost a systematic denial of the importance. It doesn't matter whether they're a person of character or not. Stepping back, I think one thing we should be asking ourselves is there a calling on some of us and some of the people we know to get more involved in politics and support and encourage those Christians we do know in an incredibly difficult environment? We should be praying for them. If you know of Christians who are active in politics, who are political leaders, pray for them. That's a biblical verse we can all get behind. How much have we prayed, even for the present president? How often in our pastoral prayers in church do we follow that biblical injunction? And let's make sure that whoever is elected, we continue to pray for them, because we can all agree on that biblical requirement.
You both being from Great Britain, you probably don't want to have this brought up, but this question says, the United States was founded in some sense in rebelling against established government.
In some sense.
Maybe you want me to stop there and comment on that? This certainly was not what Daniel or Jesus did. When is it godly for a Christian to not submit to an established government? And there's a parenthesis here, Bonhoeffer's engagement in the plot against Hitler is a counterexample. So that would be
Oh my, I want to get out alive. Within the Reformed tradition that I'm most familiar with, there has always been a diversity regarding how we should react to tyranny. There is for want of a better word, the Scottish tradition originating with John Knox, although he probably formulated it when he was in Geneva, meeting with Calvin, although he differed from Calvin on this. Knox believed it was righteous for the people to rebel against ungodly tyranny that was destroying the rights, the privileges, and the people. But Knox qualified that. He didn't mean that individuals were to do that. They were to do it through their appointed leaders. Now, society today is not the society of the middle decades of the 16th century. Knox meant by that the lords of the congregation, the nobility, would defend the rights of the people. Now, if you try and translate that into a modern context, it would be resisting through your elected leaders. The bigger question is, what nature will that resistance take? Was Bonhoeffer right to do what he did and be complicit in the assassination attempt on Hitler? Were the Scottish early reformers right to take over the castle in St Andrews and murder Archbishop Beaton, who had George Wishart murdered and other Protestants? John Knox was not part of it, but he supported it. You could say, well, we're all men and women of our time, and that's true. We mustn't think ahistorically. But that doesn't keep us from exercising our biblical intellectual faculty. You could say, for example, in the late 18th century, not only here, but throughout the British Empire, slavery. Well, people were people of their time. They may have been people of their time, but they were engaging in an abominable practice that was a disgrace and a dishonor to God and to the gospel. They were stealing people and using them for their own ends, often wicked ends. I find the whole issue problematic. It goes back to the whole Justinian question of a just war. When is a war just? Is there such a thing as a just war? Is there such a thing as a just rebellion? When Paul writes Romans 13 and when Peter writes 1 Peter 2:13, they're writing, I think, in terms of general principles. I've struggled with this. I really don't know what to do. We live in the midst of I don't think it's the right word to use, but I'll use it because it is used. We're living in your nation and mine, in the midst of a holocaust of unborn children made in the image of God being killed in utero. We look back 300 years and marvel that Christians could be so complicit in the slave trade. After John Newton was converted, he still spent another 5 years as a slave trader. I think in 300 years, if we live that long and the Lord tarries, Christians will look back at us and perhaps think, how on earth were these real Christians that tolerated this evil in their midst? I've spoken for 5 minutes and I've actually said nothing. Because really, if I'm honest, I really just don't know what to say.
Leave that one alone. This is to you, Ian. Ian Duguid. You stated in your first address that Jesus had returned from his exile. To what are you referring? His incarnation, 3 days in the grave?
Well, exile is a very evocative biblical term, as of course is Exodus, which is another term that we often think of as an Old Testament concept. Of course, it is a very powerful Old Testament concept, God bringing his people out of Egypt. But when Jesus is on the Mount of Transfiguration with Moses and Elijah, what Luke tells us is that they're discussing his exodus, the exodus that he's going to accomplish in Jerusalem, which of course is his death and resurrection. So there's a sense in which all of Jesus' life here on earth is exile. It's away from his heavenly home. It's away from home, where his Father is, where he belongs. But even deeper than that is his time on the cross, where he not only bears the discomforts, the pains, the sorrows, the sicknesses that go with being ordinarily human, but in the cross he takes into himself the judgment of God. The sun itself refuses to shine, as if it was just too horrific to look upon Jesus Christ abandoned by the Father. That's the fullness of his exile. And then when he comes triumphant from the tomb and ascends ultimately into heaven, that is his return to his heavenly home and the assurance that where he is, there we shall also be. And so we can speak of his exile very broadly or very narrowly, but ultimately heaven is his home, and he left it so that it could become our home.
We'll do one more. This is to Ian Hamilton. Should preachers directly speak to children in their sermons?
Yes. The Bible does, Paul writes his letters to children. Children belong to the covenant community. God has graciously set his name upon them. They belong, they need to know that they belong. So absolutely, if we're going to be faithful to the corpus that we have in front of us as we preach, Old Covenant Scriptures, New Covenant Scriptures, children are there. When Ezra addresses the people, children are there. Deuteronomy 6, one of the great passages in the Bible, children are there. Ephesians 6, children. Paul is speaking, writing directly to them. So absolutely, because they belong.
Okay, thank you. We're going to break for lunch now, and please be back here promptly at 1:30. We'll start the last session. Also, just a reminder.